what we have seen in the last few days, it's not a peaceful protest as far as I'm concerned from the northern part of Nigeria. The whole idea was hijacked and the script was changed as far as the north was concerned. Those who called for the protest must have come from Lagos or anywhere, but there were no visible leadership as far as Kano, Jigawa, Kaduna, and all the states that experience violence in the north. It's a fact. Even protest has a rule. The first rule is that there should be a reason for which people should protest. Of course, there is hunger, there is hardship, there is suffering as a result of the economic reforms program, which is enough reason for people to protest, but to protest peacefully. But secondly, a protest also needs leadership. When you have leaders who will lead the flock on the street, then certainly one of the responsibility of that leader is to control the crowd and to guide them. We're going to start protests from point A to point B, and we're going to start from 8 a.m. and end by 4 p.m. Now, that was not the case in the north. So from what we have seen, especially in Kaduna State, where I come from, was that people were called out to the street, and then they were left on autopilot. And now young people use the opportunity to launch attack on public infrastructure, snatch motorcycle and phones, molest people, attack banks, and looted public establishments. And then the new dimension to this is what you have just discussed, was that a day before the last protest, money was shared to youths, and then Russian flags was also shared. That shows that the whole intent of the protest is not simply about the policies and programs of the government or objection to removal of subsidy, but there was an attempt to create an atmosphere where there will be an overthrow of the government. And when you have this kind of situation, you will see that there is someone writing a script for anarchy, lawlessness, and disorder. And it is incumbent on people like us to speak. I cannot join a protest that I was not engaged or consulted in the planning stage. And I believe that no one should. If those who believe that the solution to the problem, or there is a need for people to protest, then there should have been consultations. This is not the first time we have protests in Nigeria. And you have seen protests by Labour, protests by ASU, protests by NANS. But protest has a rule. You embark on a day or two protest, and then you suspend it and create room for dialogue. There you table your demands, and negotiations take place, and then you achieve some of the objectives and aims of your own protest. But that was not the case here.
Senator, I'd like you to give us a sense, a comparative analysis, how the protests have developed in different dimensions in different parts of the country. It does look like that protest split the country into half, where we saw a different dimension up north and a different dimension down south.
Yeah, one of the fundamental differences between the protests that took place in the north and the ones in the south is that the ones in the south has identifiable leaders. You can say this person now comes on and says, we are organizing a protest tomorrow. And we're going to, this will be our meeting point, and this is where we're going. But in the whole north, nobody can pinpoint to you specifically who is responsible for the protests in Kaduna, in Jigawa, in Borno, in Kano State. So absence of leadership is one. And when you don't have leaders of protest leading a protest, then you simply have anarchy. How does a peaceful protest metamorphose into a violent one? There are 6 factors to it. The first has to do with perhaps the use of live bullets against peaceful protesters. The second has to do with infiltration of the protesters by thugs. Because thugs sometimes thugs don't need to be sponsored. They take advantage of such procession and then they loot. The third aspect of it has to do with the fact that if there are people with ulterior motives other than the one that were publicly advertised, you have violence. The fourth aspect of it is that when protests are sponsored, then it is not simply, it's not an organic procession, it's not an organic process that came from the people. It was designed to create disorder and anarchy in the land. The fourth aspect of it has to do with the fact that when you unleash thugs against peaceful protesters, then you will have violence. In our case here, the symptoms of anarchy and disorder was clear with what you have seen with the flags being displayed. When young people were called out to the street and they don't have anyone to guide them, then they guide themselves. And when mob rules, this is what we have.
But would you say that the protest in some way was politically motivated or sponsored? You said earlier that people were being given money.
Yes.
In the north.
Yes.
But that doesn't look like the case in the south. So I'm looking at a dimension that looks like there is an ethnic difference or regional differences in the manner in which those two the scenarios went. And I'll give you 3 characteristics that differentiated the northern protest and the southern protest. In the north, you saw a quick escalation of violence, such that it came to a point that, in fact, security operatives were now trying to find a way of quelling those violence. Secondly, which you will not see as much of that in the southern part of the country. Secondly, quickly, governors and in about 5 to 7 states declared curfew in some of the northern states. The third is that there are now international dimension into what happened and what we saw in the northern region of the country. How come there is a protest that was announced, but we saw something different in different parts of the country? And there are those who will say, if there are political dimension to it, to what end?
Well, I am happy that you have already been able to identify some of the differences. But I can tell you that the major difference between the southern and northern protests is that people in the north were simply told to come out to protest without leadership, coordination to tell them this is what to do. And this is how it ended up.
And those who asked them to come out, yes, they did not come out with them.
They didn't come out with them.
It was a remote and a virtual ordering or control of these people, isn't it?
Yeah. You see,